Hello everyone, today I have a sketchbook tour to share with you, and I also have a really lovely book. So I'm excited for this video because I absolutely love sketchbook tours. I love watching them, I love making them, and this sketchbook that I have in front of me has actually been a long time in the making. I first started working in this sketchbook about 3 or 4 years ago, and I filmed quite a few of the beginnings in this sketchbook as part of my Sketchbook Sanctuary class. And I say beginnings because I've now come into this sketchbook 3 or 4 years later and worked into some of those spreads and taken them in a different direction. So I never really think of a sketchbook as being finished. I always like to keep it as an open-ended process because things change, preferences change, ideas come through, and sometimes you just want to go back into a spread and work on it in a different way. So let me talk a little bit about the sketchbook. This is a hard-covered sketchbook with a ring binder. Generally, I prefer sketchbooks that are bound rather than with a ring binder, but this one, the advantage of it is it does lie really nice and flat, and the paper is heavy as well. So it's the Handbook Journal Company Field Sketchbook, and it has 300 GSM paper in it, and it's pretty small. I think it's 6 inches by 6 inches. So the approach that I took with this sketchbook, and it's in the Sketchbook Sanctuary class, is that I didn't want it to be a linear process. I wanted to mess up the blank pages and work in the sketchbook in a very non-linear, I'm trying to think of another word, but let's just say non-linear way. So what I did was I went in and I added different elements onto different pages. So rather than thinking about the page as needing to be finished in one session, what I did was I added some collage onto one page, let that dry, then move on, add in some swatches, add in some drawings, and then come back and have all these starting points that you can then continue to layer and add more into. So that's the first thing I did in this sketchbook, was create these beginnings. And I remember adding different kinds of papers. There's quite a lot of collage in this sketchbook, adding in things like stitching and trying to add quite a bit of variety. So keeping this sketchbook very mixed media. So let's go back to the beginning and I'll talk you through the pages. There aren't a huge amount of pages in this sketchbook, and that's one of the good things about a smaller sketchbook like this, smaller size, not that many pages, a really easy one to fill up. So this page started with some collage pieces. I have some craft paper in the background, and then I've finished it off with pen drawing and mark making. And I added in this leaf shape, and I'm using a white Posca pen, I think, or it might be the Uniball white paint pen. I'm not quite sure, but I'll list some of my favorite supplies that I've used in this sketchbook in the description. So then moving on to this spread here, this sketchbook is inspired by the seasons, and I was thinking about different feelings and colours and things that come through depending on whether it's spring, summer, winter, autumn. So you might pick that up as we move through the pages. And in this one, I added in a dried flower. This was actually a very vibrant yellow when I added it in, but it has now faded because it is 3 or 4 years later. So I'm not sure if there's any way to retain colour with pressed flowers. If you know, let me know in the comments, but it did feel a little bit muted and dull when I opened it up after several years. And so what I decided to do was come in with some sunny colours. So I've used a warm yellow, added in some paint, and it's really picking up a lot of the texture that's on the page. There's some tissue paper and graph paper. This looks like some coffee stain here, all sorts of different elements. And then I wanted to create some more marks on the page as well. So I added in this flower design and also these circle shapes here, just to bring the page to life. And in the background here, you can see I've actually got some journaling. Sometimes I will just write in my sketchbooks as a starting point. It's a great way to just get ideas down or get something off your mind and onto the page and then incorporate it into the spread. I very much took an art journaling approach with this sketchbook and used it for therapeutic benefits and really just to notice things and also enjoy the seasons, as I said before. So it wouldn't be a sketchbook if it didn't have a swatching page in it. I think this is the only swatching page that I have. I was swatching out some Derwent Inktense and Neocolor 2 pencils and pastels and looking for some autumn winter colours. And over here I have some paint swatches. These are acrylic ink swatches, various mixes of phthalo blue, burnt umber and warm grey. And then the other day when I came back in and started working into this sketchbook, I was mostly using pens. And I always feel like it's fun to go over the top of any swatches with some doodles and marks. And for this particular page, I drew inspiration from this fantastic book, which I wanted to, or I still will include in my mark making favourite books when I get to making that video. But I thought I would share it with you today because I have taken some of the patterns that are here from the book as inspiration. So let me bring the book in and just talk a little bit about this book. Mark Making Through the Seasons, Textile Art, Inspiration and Techniques, and it's by Helen Parrott. And it only just arrived and I was too excited to save it up for a future video. I wanted to share it with you. It has a beautiful cover. It's actually some kind of fabric and I really like the colours with the red and this quite muted lime green. Not a colour palette that I would generally use, but it is sparking my curiosity, and many of the colour palettes and ideas in here have got me thinking a little bit differently about marks and given me some fantastic ideas for my paintings. So let me just have a little flick through to show you, and what's interesting about it is that the marks are stitches. So let me find a good page. So here you can see some hand stitching, and I used one of these as inspiration on one of the swatches that I shared with you, and it was this pattern here. And I also love this one here where you've got the connected dots with the stitching, and it has that very rough and organic kind of feel to it. And over here you've got a patchwork of fabrics. And I often do include marks like this in my art, so it was a way of drawing on something that I already do in my art, but giving me a few different ideas that I can explore. So there's some fantastic photographs of her textile work, and I love the colours and the looseness of the marks. But also you've got some regularity too, where you've got marks that are more evenly spaced, whereas over here you've got a very relaxed, free-flowing stitch design. I might just flick through to a couple of my favourite pages. So I love this pattern here and how it just spreads out and all the lines are different lengths. I feel like that's really effective. And also another thing that you notice is that as you get further out, the spacing between the lines gets wider, whereas up here it's much more compact and all the lines are close together. It's a really nice effect. So a few people asked me when I mentioned that I was going to share some of my favourite mark making books, there were some comments around what's a mark making book. And I realised that there isn't really a category of book called a mark making book, but there are books that I like to go to give me inspiration for doodling and drawing and repetitive mark making and things like that. And this is one of those examples. So I thought I would share it today to give you the general gist of what I mean by a mark making book. So it can be anything that has pattern in it or interesting kind of effects. And also what's great about this book is you learn how the artist takes ideas from nature and then interprets them and comes up with these amazing patterns. It's a very inspiring book in the way that it's laid out, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. I just want to flick through a few pages so that you can get an idea of what's in the book. I really love these leaf shapes and how there's so many different types of leaf shapes in the one design. And you can see there's seasonal influences. This particular design was inspired by cracked ice. I think that's what I read when I was reading through the book. And it's tied in with the theme of winter. Simple things, but when you really look at it, there's more complexity to it than you might realise, especially around the different colours used with the threads and the spacing. Just some really beautiful patterns and ways of working. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I think I mentioned it, actually, I'm not sure, but I have included some stitching in the sketchbook. So this was appealing as well because sometimes I do like to put some slow stitching into my sketchbooks. And so this is giving me some ideas around different kinds of stitches that I can do as well. So I wanted to talk about the format of this book because it is laid out in terms of the seasons. And I love this idea, and I've actually started reading this book and I'm really enjoying the written part of the book as well as the imagery, because it encourages you to get out into nature, to walk, to notice things, and then gives you information and ideas on how to take those things that you see in nature and simplify them into patterns and marks. And sometimes that can be quite tricky because you go out and see something and it's very full, there's a lot of detail in it, and it's helpful to hear from another artist how they take their ideas and then make them work for their art practice and simplify the ideas down. So I've found that personally very interesting to read about. It's also encouragement to just get outside and appreciate what's around you. And that's something that I need to remember as far as when I go out into nature, that it is part of the creative process, that it's not wasted time. And I've been doing a lot of walking lately because we do have a puppy and I'm getting out into nature on a regular basis, just taking her out for walks and toilet breaks and things like that. And it's making me realise that I can use that time for my art practice and take photographs and bring things back from my walks and enjoy the inspiration in the studio. And I actually did create a series of paintings just based on what I saw in my walks. So this is just such a good and helpful reminder of that. So you can see that one of her suggestions in autumn is to take an autumn colour walk and things like that, and then to identify shapes and patterns. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what's in this book. Definitely one to check out, and I think that Helen has another book as well. So definitely look up Helen Parrott and see what books she has available, and you can check out her work on her Instagram and things like that as well. Okay, let's bring in the sketchbook again. So here you can see where I have put stitches into a spread on the sketchbook. So these stitches I put directly into the sketchbook page. So you can see on the back here where I've tied off the ends of the string. I don't mind things like that in my sketchbook. I think that it just adds a little extra bit of texture. I also added in this botanical image just because I wanted to make this spread a little bit more symbolic of spring and new growth. I really like the zingy colour palette that I've used, and I felt like it needed a focal area, so I added in this drawing the other day. So this spread was inspired by this quote, and the quote comes from Beth Compton, and I was reading one of her books at the time that I first started working in this sketchbook, and this quote comes from the book: "There is great value and comfort to be found in simplicity." So because of that, I was taking a simpler approach with this spread and using a very minimalistic colour palette and a silhouette. So I've got a branch here which has just the beginnings of some new growth. So this was inspired by the end of winter where things are starting to bud and you know that spring is coming and the sun is starting to shine, but it hasn't quite taken off yet. And you can see a dried pansy here. So back when I was creating this sketchbook, I had a lot of pansies in the garden. And when I was flicking through this the other day, it made me regret the fact that I didn't plant pansies this year in the garden. But anyway, back then I had a lot. So I had all these dried flowers as well that I popped in. And I've always loved pansies during the winter just for the bit of colour that they add into the season. Okay, so this one here, I had started this with a stencil background, some craft paper, a simple drawing, and then I went in the other day with some more pen work. So I've come in with, I think it might be a Posca black pen, and done these little flower designs. And I really like how this has provided more contrast. So when I came into the page and I had fresh eyes, I felt like it needed something more. And then I possibly took it a little bit too far over here. It's a little bit busy. I might have benefited from a bit of space, but I ended up adding in a mandala on this side as well. And I used to paint mandalas all the time. I don't measure things up. I just do them very freehand. I used to paint them on rocks or draw them on stones and things like that. And it was quite fun and nostalgic to go back and do a design like this. It's not the best design by a long shot. I feel like I'm a bit rusty, but it was fun to revisit that idea. So this spread here, I had a bit of a tussle with this one. I had a design underneath here, which I did in the class. So this is a spread that I did in my Sketchbook Sanctuary class. So some of you may have seen it at some stage if you took that class. And I had this design. It was inspired by some cherry blossoms that hadn't yet come into bloom, I think. And I had done it with a skewer and some ink, but it was quite thick. And so I went in and covered it with a piece of collage and did a finer design using a white paint pen. And I do like the drawing, but the whole page is very busy. I just feel like there's a lot of competing elements, and individually I like the elements, but together it's a bit too much. So I have this pattern here, I have this drawing, these splodges are kind of getting in the way of the drawing, and then I have this area which I did with acrylic ink, and I do love the effect of this. So this is one of those pages where I could go in and say, oh, I like this bit and I like this bit and I like this bit, but I don't necessarily love it all together. And that's absolutely fine, because sometimes when I'm flicking through my sketchbooks, I just look for the bits and then I'll take this and then create a painting based on this bit rather than it all together, if that makes sense. That's what sketchbooks are for. This one here, I really like this. I feel like this is a lesson in simplicity. So where I said that the previous spread was busy, this one has the white space and the calmness that I like. I drew these plants here, or these little branches, in the class in pencil. I've since come back in and coloured them in with a black pen, and I really like the effect and how that makes them pop. But what I really love about this page is just this overlapping area here where I've got a little bit of an old serviette, and then I've got some paint. I actually used a green Posca paint pen here to create these shapes and then use some water to turn that into paint. And then I've got some Derwent Inktense pencil work and some pen work. But I just really like the combination of the textures and shapes, and then you can see a little bit of stitching inspired mark making. And whenever I look at this, it reminds me of a picnic, like sitting down on a picnic blanket. Something really lovely about it. Okay, so this spread here, I ended up adding some more drawings into it. So you've got that pansy inspiration again. I don't really love this drawing, so I may end up at a later stage. As you can see, this is why my sketchbooks are never finished. I might end up covering up some of this, maybe with some collage paper. Maybe I could come in and have another go at the drawing. Who knows? I quite like this shape here, so I could perhaps just get inspired by this shape and repeat it. I'm not sure, or else I'll just leave it as is. We'll see. This one here is again inspired by being a little bit simpler and calmer, leaving the white space, allowing things to just flow. You can see some nice soft grey areas that look very cloud-like. It reminds me of a cloudy day with the sun starting to break through. It has that peaceful feel to it. This spread, I didn't add anything to this. This was one of my favourite spreads that's actually in the class, and it was inspired by golden wattle, which is something that always comes into bloom in our area and really provides that burst of colour towards the end of winter. And I love that. And so you can see the little gold dots that I've done, which look a little bit like the blossoms on a wattle plant. I really like this drawing, and I have the stitching here, but I did it in a different way, and I really like this method. It was a bit of an experiment, but what I did was I actually stitched onto craft paper first, and then I glued that into the sketchbook using some kind of gel medium or something like that. And that way I didn't have to actually punch through the page of the sketchbook. So you can see that I don't have the messiness on the other side. So I thought that was pretty clever at the time when I did it. I'm sure other people do that too, but I really quite like the effect and how all these earthy colours combine together. So there's a lot of acrylic ink used in this sketchbook. This is definitely some burnt umber and warm grey and colours like that. I really like using acrylic ink in my sketchbook spreads if I know that I'll be coming over the top with pen, because it doesn't reactivate when you put the acrylic paint pen down. Sometimes watercolour, I find you pick up the colour from the watercolour and your line work can get a little bit dirty. This sketchbook has a bit of a spring feel to it, although I do feel like the colours have faded a little bit, but maybe I've just forgotten what I actually did to start with. But I remember it being inspired by grass and spring inspiration, and it just has that really nice abstract looseness, which sometimes can be hard to get into your art. So this is always a good reminder to me to not overwork things, just to let the paint do its thing. Trust in the unpredictable nature of acrylic ink and watercolour, because I do feel like those paints in particular do really beautiful things when you just let them kind of move on the page and don't fuss and overwork too much. I've come in on this page with some Neocolor 2 pastels as well. I always love that salmon pink colour for a little bit of a pop or accent with the kind of colour palettes that I use in my art. This one is also from the class, and it's all about staying loose. So I definitely was in that loose frame of mind when I was doing these pages, and you can see that I'm building up layers of leaves using different materials, which is always a very fun approach and something that you can do when you are feeling a bit stuck or low on ideas and motivation. So I've come in and I've created some leaves using Neocolor 2, acrylic ink, I think this is Derwent Inktense pencil, and it's quite pretty, the effect that you get when you use different materials in the one spread but in a similar range of colours. I also just thought I would point out that I spilt some ink here, so that's why there are these splodges at the top. They weren't there before, but you know how it goes. These last two I did at a later stage or at a different time, so not when I was filming the class, and because of that, they have quite a different feel. I came back into them and I just wasn't sure about them, and sometimes when I don't like something or I just want to take it in a different direction, I will do some negative space type painting. So I ended up getting out some white acrylic, painting over this side of the page and just carving out some simple shapes. You've got these marks here, again, a little bit similar to stitched marks. So I'm bringing in some of that inspiration, repeating the shape in a different material. And I quite like this as an abstract exercise. It's quite different to everything else in the sketchbook. Sometimes that happens if time has gone by and you come back in and then you're in a different frame of mind using different materials, different colours. But that's okay. There's still a little bit of stuff here that's reminiscent of what I was doing. There's a drawing here, which I kept because I did quite like this drawing against the blues, the nice contrast. And then the final spread, again, is a little bit different. And it's a paint over. If you see a negative space in my sketchbook, more than likely it's some kind of paint over. Or if you see collage. But anyway, I've come over the top and obliterated a little bit of what was going on underneath. But I really, really loved the patterns and colours. And so I created this leaf shape. I also really love this leaf shape. It's funny how sometimes you just do something off the cuff and then you look at it and you realise that you really enjoy the shape that you did without thinking too hard about it. And then over here, I have a Banksia plant. You can barely see it, but it's etched in really loosely. Again, I really like it because, again, I wasn't trying so hard. That's the beauty of a page that you think is a bit rubbish. You can just go in there with anything else and you feel quite free. So with this page, I felt very free to just go for it. And I do love a few of the things that came through. And there's some patterns left over from the first time I went at this page, which I do really enjoy as well. So there's always something. When you dig in a bit, you can always find things that you like on a page. And that's the end of this sketchbook. So I've realised I do have like one page on the back, which I could work on, but usually I work across 2 pages, as you can see. So that's my overall approach, and that's what feels natural and normal to me. So I might come in and finish that last page at some point, or I'll just leave it as a blank one. So I hope that you've enjoyed this sketchbook tour. It's given you some inspiration. Maybe you might want to check out the book that I shared and at least get some ideas around how you can use books to inspire your art in different ways. I've been sharing quite a lot of book videos, so I wanted to give you a little bit more of an example of how that can work in a sketchbook format. Also, if you wanted to check out the class, Sketchbook Sanctuary, I'll leave that link in the comments. Quite a lot of the spreads in this sketchbook are from that class, and the class is all about building up that very relaxed approach to working in your sketchbook, coming at it in a non-linear way, and being inspired by the seasons. All the information will be in the description. Also, I have a couple of other sketchbooks that are in a similar stage that this one was in, where I might come back in and do some more mark making and build up the pages. And if you want to see that, let me know, because I could just flick on a camera and show you how I work through a sketchbook just using pens and things like that. And that's how I often bring my sketchbooks to completion. So let me know if you'd like to see that as well.